At 2:17 p.m. local time, a F-35 Lightning II of the U.S. Air Force was patrolling at an altitude of approximately 30,000 feet west of Tehran, monitoring the critical route connecting the capital to Karaj. Over the previous 2 weeks, the U.S.-Israel coalition had struck a series of Iranian military targets, turning them into scrap metal, yet deliberately left this transportation corridor untouched. This was not an oversight. It was a trap waiting to be triggered. And then, within seconds, the data began to change. On the sensor display, a band of heat signatures appeared and extended along the direction of movement. Initially faint, but quickly becoming clear. The system rapidly reconstructed the formation in simulation. On the thermal map, the structure of the formation gradually became clear. 6 to 8 heavy vehicles emitted strong heat signatures from their engine compartments. 2 vehicles at the rear showed lower thermal output, most likely technical support vehicles. The spacing between vehicles remained fixed, maintaining a tight formation. The data was compressed and transmitted to the command center in cycles. The system began classifying the targets based on movement patterns, speed, formation spacing, and thermal signatures. The probability of identification increased with each update. Within just a few minutes, a conclusion was reached. This was a TEL convoy in motion. From this structure, the coordination center immediately understood that this was not a standard transport unit, but a firepower deployment. A brigade-level TEL unit can carry between 4 and 6 ready-to-launch ballistic missiles, accompanied by command vehicles and control systems. Each EMAD missile has a range exceeding 1,056 miles and a warhead weighing between 1,650 and 2,200 pounds, capable of striking strategic targets such as air bases or command centers. The total value of the convoy is estimated at between $300 million and $500 million. This is not just a mobile unit. This is part of a strategic deterrence capability that Iran has spent years building and cannot be replaced in the short term. A decision was made immediately. There was no need to destroy the convoy, as preventing it from reaching its destination would already constitute a significant loss. Terrain analysis showed that there was only one point capable of completely severing the transport route. Other sections could be repaired or temporarily bypassed, but the bridge ahead could not. This is the only choke point in the entire area. Although still under construction, Iran chose to route the convoy through this direction, confident that this would be the last place the United States would expect. And that very decision would become the greatest weakness in the entire plan. The distance to the bridge continued to decrease. The estimated time for the convoy to reach it is under 15 minutes. With the current trajectory, they have no ability to change direction in the short term. That means the entire plan depends on that bridge. On the simulation display, the status shifted from green to yellow. The entire system entered pre-strike mode. Target parameters were displayed in priority order. The main load-bearing pillar was identified as the optimal strike point. At exactly 2:19 p.m., the strike command was activated. A short coded signal was transmitted in under 0.1 seconds. The entire system transitioned from tracking to engagement. The process was complete. Immediately after the command was activated, an AGM-158J ASSM was launched from outside air defense range. Its small turbofan engine ignited instantly, pushing the missile into a stable flight trajectory. It quickly descended below 330 feet, switching to terrain-following mode. At this altitude, the radar horizon was completely masked, making detection nearly impossible. The selection of this missile was not random. In a mission requiring precise strikes on a specific structural point, the most critical factor is not maximum destructive power, but the ability to reach the target without being detected. The AGM-158J ASSM was designed specifically to solve that problem. Its low-altitude, terrain-following flight profile and reduced radar signature allow it to penetrate layered air defenses without direct engagement. More importantly, its guidance system does not rely entirely on GPS. And in this case, that is the decisive factor. Once the trajectory was established, focus shifted to strike point selection. Meanwhile, at the Coordination Center, a 3D structural model of the bridge was enlarged. The main load-bearing pillar at mid-span was identified as the critical vulnerability. With a height exceeding 426 feet and load distributed along a longitudinal axis, disrupting a single structural connection would destabilize the entire span. The final parameters were locked: low approach angle, off-axis impact to maximize torsional stress, and a detonation delay calculated in milliseconds to allow the warhead to penetrate deep into the concrete core before exploding. The missile continued at extremely low altitude, maintaining a stable trajectory without mid-course correction. The guidance system switched to inertial navigation combined with digital terrain mapping, eliminating dependence on GPS entirely. Error margins were continuously corrected using internal data, narrowing to under 10 feet. At high subsonic speed, each passing second translated into hundreds of meters closed. On the ground, the convoy continued moving forward in formation. The spacing between vehicles remained minimal to maintain cohesion, with speed steady at around 25 miles per hour. There was no reconnaissance vehicle ahead and no dispersion plan. For them, the route ahead remained completely safe, and the bridge was simply the only point that needed to be crossed on schedule. As the distance dropped below 6 miles, the missile entered its terminal phase. The altitude was further reduced to just a few dozen meters above terrain. The dive angle was precisely adjusted to match the pre-calculated impact point. The target lock remained stable, and all error margins were reduced to near zero. At this distance, there was no longer any possibility of detection or reaction. Even if radar systems were active, the time from detection to impact would be measured in seconds. The missile maintained its trajectory and drove directly into the main load-bearing pillar of the bridge. The impact occurred instantly. The penetrating warhead drove directly into the base of the pillar, retaining its kinetic energy before detonating inside the structure. The explosion did not spread across the entire bridge, but concentrated within the load-bearing concrete core. The shockwave propagated laterally, severing critical connections between the pillar and the main beams. The structural integrity began to fail from within. Cracks appeared and spread along the length of the pillar. The redistributed stress exceeded the design limits of the remaining structure within milliseconds. The main pillar could no longer support the load of the span above. The imbalance did not occur uniformly, but concentrated at the highest load point, which collapsed first. The central span began to drop. Both ends of the bridge remained intact, but the middle section lost all support. The main beams fractured at their connection points with the pillar, creating a clear gap in the structure. The bridge did not fully collapse, but was split into two separate sections. That gap was sufficient to sever the entire transport route. The lead vehicle reacted instinctively, braking as the empty space ahead suddenly opened. But by then, it was too late. The vehicles behind did not have enough time to maintain spacing, forcing abrupt braking and compressing the formation into a confined space. Safe distance was lost, and the entire convoy became immobilized. Some vehicles attempted to turn around, but there was not enough space to maneuver. The return path was quickly blocked by the vehicles behind. There was no alternative option. The entire transport corridor was cut off instantly. The first report sent back to headquarters was not, "We are under attack," but, "The bridge is no longer usable." This distinction was critical. If directly ambushed, the convoy could have dispersed or attempted to withdraw. But when the only crossing point along the entire route was gone, the convoy itself became a stationary mass of steel on the road. At the command level, the immediate reaction would be to search for an alternative route. However, the regional map offered very limited options. Other routes required significant detours and lacked the load-bearing capacity to support TEL systems and their accompanying support vehicles. Even if a viable secondary route existed, turning around a convoy of vehicles weighing dozens of tons, dispersing formation, and re-establishing movement could not be completed in a short time. That is the true consequence of this strike. But its impact did not stop there. In the minutes that followed, the problem extended beyond the trapped convoy and spread throughout the system behind it. Units moving along the same corridor were forced to halt and await new instructions. Alternative routes quickly became overloaded as traffic was redirected. The disruption began to cascade layer by layer. At the tactical level, field commanders attempted to stabilize the formation. Several options were considered, including splitting the convoy or holding position. However, both options shared the same weakness: time. With every passing minute, the risk of detection and tracking increased. The Tehran-Karaj route, once considered the most stable transport corridor in the region, was removed from operational use within minutes. Secondary routes lacked the capacity for heavy vehicles, while longer routes extended deployment timelines by hours, even days. The extent of the damage was confirmed within nearly 60 minutes after the explosion. The central span of the bridge was completely destroyed, creating a large gap in the structure. Both ends remained intact, but were no longer connected. With an estimated value of $400 million, this was one of Iran's largest infrastructure projects still under construction, and restoration would not be possible in the short term. According to initial Iranian reports, the strike resulted in at least 8 fatalities and 95 injuries. At the political level, the response came almost immediately. U.S. President Donald Trump publicly took responsibility for the strike. In a post on Truth Social, he stated that the bridge will never be used again and warned that there would be further consequences if Iran refused to accept a settlement to end the conflict. A day earlier, during a primetime address, he emphasized that the military campaign was approaching completion. He also reiterated the possibility of expanding strikes to other infrastructure targets, including the power grid, stating that the U.S. would strike simultaneously if necessary. The strike on the bridge was therefore not an isolated action. It was a signal, a message that strategic infrastructure, including unfinished projects, was within the range of potential targets. This forced Iran to disperse its defensive resources, not only for combat units, but across its entire logistical system. At the tactical level, the TEL convoy remained intact, but the transport route had been severed. There was no alternative corridor available in the short term. There was no immediate ability to reorganize the formation. The entire deployment plan was halted in place. At the operational level, the impact was even greater. The loss of a single choke point forced the entire movement chain behind it to be recalculated. Alternative routes extended timelines, exposed movement paths, and increased the risk of detection. This meant the loss of the most critical factor: timing. The TEL convoy was still there, but it no longer arrived on schedule. And in an operation dependent on synchronization, that alone was enough to change the outcome. The bridge was split in two, but what was truly destroyed was the entire operational flow behind it.